What's going on, everybody? Man, last week I brought up the question on saving up for that one big card or buying lots of little cards. And a couple of people were like, haven't you talked about this before? And I'm like, 100% I've talked about this before. And the reason I've talked about it before is, to me, it's the most difficult question and decision in the hobby. I mean, of course we all want lots of cards. Of course we like picking up new cards. Of course we want to have lots of different things to look at. But do we want that more than we want the big card? One of the things I don't think I did a great job of trying to explain as I talked about this particular question this last week when I brought it up was I'm more interested in, once you have the big card, if it's worth selling the big card to buy a bunch of other cards. So it's hard to save up money, which we'll talk about. It's hard to go on a dry spell so you can build up that account, which we'll talk about. But once you have the big card, would you sell the big card? And the analogy I brought up, or the situation I brought up, is every single day when you have a card that's an expensive card, you're basically buying it at that price, because every day you can either have that card that you've got in your collection, or you could have the money that you would net instead. So every day you don't sell the card, you're choosing to have the card instead of that amount of money. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've got a lot of cards in my collection that I want the card more than the money, which is why I keep the card. But there are times that I have had cards and I've said, I think I want the money here more than I want the card. And I like the card, but then by selling the card and getting the money, then I might be able to buy that other card over there now that I'm really hankering for. So that's the question for this week, for today, that you all answered over last week. And the fun thing about this week's answers and responses from all of you is the wide variety of perspectives and the wide variety of obstacles along the way with making this decision. And that's what a lot of it was, is it wasn't, a lot of the responses were not, this is right, this is wrong, this is what I would do. It was, well, the problem is if I do this, then this happens. Or if I do that, then this happens. That was really interesting. Now, before I get into the first response, which is a fantastic response, a really well-written response, I wanted to share with you two items that were recently sent to me. Trevor sent me this Greg Nettles autograph card. Now, this thing is fantastic. It's like a Cooperstown Classics, a Derek Jeter says, you can see there. So cool. I absolutely love this card. Didn't have it. Thank you for that, Trevor. I appreciate it so much. And then Jay, after I did my football card video where I showed off some of my Sammy Baugh cards and I was talking about this set, the All-American set, which I think is one of the best vintage football sets out there. I was talking about how one of the Sammy Baugh cards I wanted was this one, and Jay reached out to me and he said, hey, I got one. It's yours if you'd like it. And I'm like, heck yeah, I'd like it. I need it for my Sammy Baugh collection. So thrilled to have that. I'm probably going to send it into SGC just so it matches the rest of my Baugh cards. So thank you so much for that, Jay and Trevor. Very, very generous. Thank you, guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first response, which I think is a really, really interesting story from my friend Dave. Let's check it out. In addressing your question regarding buying a dream card or multiple cards, I would like to describe my experience. During COVID, a major auction house told me I could get a record price for the most valuable card in my collection, a 1933 Goudey Yellow Ruth in an SGC 8.5.
That card could have been considered my dream card, and I decided to auction it. My reason was to convert some of the value of my collection into cash. However, I have subsequently used some of those funds to purchase several cards which fit my collection. I am happy with my decision. Part of the fun in having a collection is locating a card in the condition you are seeking and then obtaining that card. For me, that was more than satisfying than holding on to the dream card. I have little desire to again purchase that Ruth card. Having once owned it, acquiring it again does not seem like a challenge. So to directly answer your question, I would rather buy multiple cards and experience the fun of locating and buying those cards than just going after one dream card. Collectors like to collect. Sorry for being long-winded.
Oh man, Dave absolutely nailed this answer. See, and the fun thing about Dave's response is there are so many places I want to go in my response to what he had to say. First of all, could you imagine having a 33 Goudey yellow Ruth? Ruth had, again, 4 cards in that set. Having the yellow one, which is a tougher one, in an SGC 8.5. And then when the market absolutely is peaking, he let it go. Man, and he even says in here, it was pretty much a dream card. I mean, how could it not be? It's an SGC 8.5 Goudey Ruth. Unbelievable. And it's a beautiful image on that card. And I think that this is so interesting because, he says he sold it. He sold the card at like the height of the market, cashed it out. And then once he cashed it out, he used some of the funds to buy some other cards that fit his collection. But the most interesting part is at the end when he says, now that I've had the card, I don't really have this desire to own it again. The fun is the chase and the hunt for the card and the hunt for the right one. And then once you have it, you've basically accomplished that. You've checked that box. Yeah, I had a really, really high-end Ruth, yellow Ruth. And that itch has been scratched. Now, how many of you out there, and let me know, seriously, have had a card that you liked when you bought it, and then you decided, I think I'm going to sell it, and then you ended up going, oh man, I really wish that card, I want to buy it again. A lot of the times when you've been there and done that, and then the card moved on, it's fine. There's not really this strong desire to go land the card again. You've already had the card. What do you need the card again? My dad, who I've talked on and on and on about collecting the 59 and 60 top sets. When we go to shows and he sees cards from those sets, he likes them. But I don't remember the last time I saw him buy a 59 or a 60 because he's already had them in high grade. And so he kind of is like, yeah, I already did that. I've already been there. I've already done that. Now I'm on this new hunt. I thought that was such brilliant perspective about the hunt. And sometimes people move on from certain cards in their collection, right? There are times where people decide, yeah, I've enjoyed this card over here, but I think I'm going to sell it because I want to now go after this other card, or I want to get into this new set. I think most of us do that. It's not that we get bored with a card, but it's like we've satisfied the need of owning it, and now we want to own something else. And I think that's totally normal. And that's what happened here with Dave. Now, he has an incredible collection, which you saw part of if you watched my videos of the National. But what's more impressive than his collection is the guy. I got to have multiple conversations with Dave in Cleveland. Fantastic person, fantastic collection. And Dave, I think you absolutely nailed what I was really asking specifically in this particular last week's question, which is when you have a card, does there ever come a time that you'd rather cash out because it's time to move on from that card and get the money instead, and then maybe buy multiple pieces to your collection? And it sounds like that's what you did. And it sounds like you're super satisfied with how it went. And after seeing your collection, I totally understand why you'd feel that way. So great answer. And there are a lot more great answers. Let's go ahead and take a look at a few more.
Greg, I would absolutely love to sell many of my cards. However, it is most difficult, if not impossible, unless you attend a card show, of which none are close to me, as I am situated in Louisville, Kentucky. My wife does not like me to mail these off due to the issues with crime, etc. Therefore, if cards could be sold and valued in a reasonable, safe, and efficient environment, it would be a no-brainer for me. Until then, I just have to wait for the National in Chicago in 2025. I do have a few cards I am gifting to you if you attend. You surely bring much-needed joy to this hobby of ours.
Okay, so I thought this was another great comment. Sometimes, when you're doing something and you're collecting or you're going through life, you're like, am I the only one that feels this way? And then sometimes you find out, no, I'm not. I totally get this comment. It is not easy to sell cards. Now, what do you mean, Greg? You just put them on eBay. You do put them on eBay, but let's just walk through that process for a second, okay? So you buy a card, and when you buy the card, depending on where you live, you pay sales tax. So I live in California. It's about 8%, something like that. I don't even know. I think it changes by the county, but it's over 8%. So if I buy a card for, let's just say I buy a $1,000 card, at 8%, that's $80. So now the card was $1,080. Then you got to pay to ship it, right? So now if it's insured and all that stuff, we'll just call it $1,100. That's probably a little high, $1,090. So then you own the card for a while and you decide to sell the card. Well, where are you going to sell the card? Well, if you sell it on eBay, they get a cut. Now, again, depending on the price of the card, there's like this, of course they have a confusing method to their commission because then you don't really know what they're getting and they don't really want you to know. But, it's somewhere 12, 13%. Some cards that are a little more, it's like 10%. So let's just call it 10%. So then you sell the card and you have to pay 10%. So say you sell the same card that you bought for $1,000 and sell it for $1,000. You bought it for $1,000, you really paid $1,090, right? Between the tax and the shipping. And then you go to sell it for $1,000. And then eBay is going to get, we'll just call it 10%. So they're going to get $100, right? So now the card that you bought for $1,000 and you sold for $1,000 is now about $1,200 that it cost you. It's $200. It's $200 in extra fees to buy it and then to sell it. So you walk with $800. So you bought a card for $1,000, you sold the card for $1,000, but you get $800. And I understand that eBay needs a fee. I get that. But then let's go further. So say you buy an ungraded card and you've got to get it graded. Why do you have to get it graded? Well, if you're going to maximize your profit and you're going to sell it online, it really needs to be graded, right? Now you could sell it ungraded, but you're going to likely get more if it's graded. So then you send it into PSA, who's going to charge you 20 or 25 bucks. Then you have to ship it there, and then you have to get it shipped back. And then eBay is going to take their sweet time, which again, when they say it's like a 30-day turnaround or a 45-day turnaround, that's 30 and 45 work days. Now, when that switched is very, is very blurry. It's blurry on purpose. Right? There was a time that 30 days meant 30 days. And then they kind of changed the language to 30 work days. So you're paying more to get cards graded than you used to. It takes longer to get the cards graded than it used to. You're paying a lot in sales tax. You're paying a lot to eBay fees. You know, and that was one of the comments I made, is all the fees associated with selling. You know, if I bought my house for $500,000 and I sold my house for $500,000, by the time I pay the realtors and the closing costs and the listing fees and the escrow fees and all these different things, you're losing a fortune if you sell the house for the exact same amount that you bought the house for. And it's the same thing with cards. It's like every time you look around, everyone's getting rich except for you. And then, and I haven't even mentioned, then you have to pay income tax on the card, right? So you say you bought a card that went up. That's nice, right? So you bought it for $1,000 and it goes up to $1,500. Now you made $500. Now, if you make over a certain amount, you have to pay income tax on the $500, right? So now you pay income tax on the $500, but when you sell it, you're just gonna probably go buy another card. So you bought the card for $1,000. It's getting complicated, right? Bought the card for $1,000, you paid sales tax, you're out about $100 for that. You decide to sell it, you're out about $100 to eBay for that. You got the shipping fees in between. If you didn't grade it, there's that. The card, finally you buy a card that goes up in value. So the card went up in value, and now you have to pay income tax on the amount that it went up in value. But it's not like you're taking that and it's your income. It's not like you're taking that money, that $500 that the card went up, and you're going to feed your family with it, or you're going to pay your electric bill with it. You just want a different card. You just want to, instead of having this card, you now want this card. And you're paying sales tax when you buy, income tax when you sell, eBay fees when you sell. You've got to pay fees to ship back and forth. Everyone's making money except for us. And you have to worry about, what if it gets lost in the mail? What if there's a theft because it gets placed on a porch and it disappears, as is mentioned here? It's not as easy to just say, I've decided I want to sell, then I think I want to sell and get a different card. Because I do look at it like, I want to trade this card for this card, but the person who has the card that I want probably doesn't want the card that I have. So I can't just trade them. I have to sell it to get cash, to trade the cash for the card. And then there are all the fees. It's made it where it's expensive just to keep a card at the same amount. If you buy a $1,000 card and you want to trade it in for a different $1,000 card, you're out income tax, sales tax, shipping fees, eBay fees, and then you got to pay the sales tax on the card that you bought and the shipping charges on the card that you bought. You lose such a big percentage that every time you change, you lose quite a bit. To me, that's really discouraging when you're trying to just slowly build your collection. And that's all I am, a collector. I'm not running a side business here. I'm just a guy who likes cards. And sometimes I decide I want that card over there more than the card I have in my hand. But apparently that's become really expensive to trade them out.
To answer the question, I'd like to think I would have the discipline to save and go after the dream card, but I don't. So I end up buying multiple cards. However, it does work out because I am a set collector. I put together a 55 set earlier this year, and I'm currently working on a 56 set that I hope to complete within the next 6 months. Then it will be on to the 57 set. Maybe one day I'll trade all of my sets for a 52 Mantle, but today is not that day. And my friend Theo, the Clemente collector, says, answer to the question, I think most of us that are on YouTube buy the smaller cards and not the dream cards. If not, we wouldn't have pickup videos for 3+ years. My definition of a dream card is saving up your card budget for a very long time to buy it. So the price threshold would vary collector to collector. Most collectors I know want action. They want to chase cards daily. So by saving for years, the hobby isn't the same, and to me it isn't as fun. So I think most guys I know buy an abundance of cards over one card. Now, if I win the lottery and had $50,000 for cards, I would buy the dream card with all of it and go back to my normal routine of buying lower value grades after.
So much truth. Can we all relate to this? I think we can all relate to this. Being patient to slowly save up is so difficult. We live in this world of instant gratification, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, we've been trained and we've been catered to get whatever we want whenever we want it. You know, there was a time I used to have to be home to watch the TV show that I wanted. And now it's just recorded and available whenever I want to watch it. The world revolved around me on that now, right? Which is awesome. It's awesome. You know, we have these phones that have Google, and just about anything you want to know, you can find the answer to in almost no time at all. And that's one of the reasons I think a lot of remember in school growing up, in high school, you'd have to remember dates and you'd have to remember names and you'd have to remember all of that, like those facts. To a certain extent, do we really need to be using space in our brain to remember the date of a certain battle and the name of the general of that particular battle and the name of the city in which it happened, when we could just Google it and know instantly? Now, some people say, yeah, there are certain facts we need to know. There are some facts we need to know. But more than that, I think knowing how to access the information is also pretty helpful. But the point I'm trying to make is we don't have very many times we need to be patient. Even when you go to Disneyland, you get a fast pass, right? You go to the front of the line, you pay the fee, and you get to skip the line, like the lightning lane or whatever they call it. Like, we've just live in this world now where, you know, the internet is so fast, the TV has everything ready whenever we are, that it's difficult to be patient. It's always been difficult to be patient. But what happened for a long time is we learned patience through years and years and years of being patient. And now it's like impossible to be patient because we never have to be patient. So when you want to save up for something, you know, it's like investing. You know, you have to start investing at a young age so that compound interest can really take effect. I tell my students all the time, when you set up a retirement account, it's really, really important that you do it as soon as possible, because time is like the most important factor in long-term investing because of the compound interest. The more times it can compound and the more times it can snowball, the bigger it gets. If you wait too long to start, then the amount that you put in has to be so much higher to reach the same level, because time is so important with compounding interest. And time is difficult. Time is so difficult. And when we live in this world where we could scroll on eBay, we could scroll on Facebook, Marketplace, we can look on Instagram, we can go to card shows, and there's just constantly stuff for sale that's, I like that. It's so hard to save up. And I'm just as guilty as anyone. I'm not saying anybody else is, I'm good and everyone else is bad. Like, I have some big cards that I've tried to save up for, and a couple of them I have, and a couple of them I got sidetracked along the way. Now, Theo mentioned something that I thought was really interesting in his comment about, well, if I don't buy a card for a year or two, then I don't have pickup videos. That's never crossed my mind about whether if I wait for a big card that I won't have a pickup video for this month. When I buy cards, I'm just documenting my thoughts and my purchases. I've never bought a card or not bought a card because I wanted to show it or not show it. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm sure that a lot of people feel this way. But I personally, this is just like a documentary of Craig going through the hobby. And I've never bought a card because I was like, I haven't bought anything yet this month. I need something to show. Never happened. I understand why people might do that. I understand why I've gone to card shows and come home with nothing. And I did a whole card show video and people are like, well, what'd you get? And I'm like, oh, I didn't get anything. That's why I didn't show you anything. That happens. That happens for me. But yeah, there's no doubt about it that the waiting game is brutal. But I can tell you from a guy who landed his Ernie Banks Grail card, I waited a really, really long time for the right one. And it wasn't cheap. It wasn't as expensive as it should have been because my buddy Ash gave me such a fantastic deal. But it wasn't cheap. And I waited a long time. But when you wait a really long time for the right thing, oh man, is it worth it? You know? You could have married the first girl who wanted to marry you. Or you could have married the right girl. And when the right girl comes along, boy, is it worth the wait, right? I think it's kind of like that. So it is difficult to be patient, but if you can be patient, saving up and getting that big card, I think is going to be worth the wait. And from my experience, it absolutely was.
Gave a video like. Always nice to trade out of cards you enjoy less and into cards you enjoy more. Trading can also involve money on one or both ends. I still view it as trading. Makes easier to trade for what you want to appreciate in a collection more. Great topic, Greg. Oh yes, it's worth it. I've been in the hobby for 30 years and owned just about every 50s to 80s card you could have, but when I have a chance to consolidate and get my 52 Mantle, it was amazing. Finally, I had one. Now, every other Mantle card I see doesn't compare. I don't find myself wanting other cards. They all pale in comparison to me. RE, your question? I think it depends on whether I'm expanding or consolidating my collection. If I'm consolidating, I can see selling 50,000 worth of smaller cards to get that 52 Topps Mantle. In fact, I have considered it. I did it on a smaller scale to get a nice 53 Topps Mantle, which I consider more beautiful, though not as historically important. And I am working on doing it to acquire a Clemente rookie. There is something to be said for swapping a pile of less expensive cards for, say, a dozen really important cards. I think as my PC becomes more bloated, I tend to start thinking like that, but haven't yet gone all in on selling many to buy a few.
So this was fantastic. Here are a couple of examples of people who did trade up to the bigger card, to the card they really wanted. They cashed out some cards. They got the big card. And they were thrilled with it. So sometimes having the big card and selling it to buy lots of other stuff, that's the right decision for some. And sometimes selling some of the smaller things and getting the big card, That's the right one for some. Again, and that's the whole beauty of this whole thing, is there's not a right way and a wrong way, right? My way is gonna be absolutely different than everyone else's. And it doesn't mean Greg's right and they're wrong, or they're right and Greg's wrong. It doesn't mean that. All it means is it's just different. I totally get the perspective of wanting to sell a bunch of stuff to get a big card. You know, my buddy Orlando of A Collector's Dream, great channel, absolutely wonderful person. In person, he's even better than he is on video, and on video, he's a wonderful person. He sold tons of his cards from the 50s and 60s to be able to buy his 52 Topps Mantle. And it is a stunning card. It is one of the best examples of that card that I've ever seen. And he said many times, I've asked him on my channel, on this channel, I've asked, do you ever regret it? Do you miss any of those cards? He's like, no, I've had them. It was cool. But, you know, I have no interest in going back and getting those cards that I sold to acquire the Mantle. Makes sense. So sometimes it absolutely is worth it to consolidate for the dream, to consolidate for the card. And that's okay too. So if you decide to go the route that Dave went, where you have the big card and you sell it, and then it opens up a bunch of capital, a bunch of money to get a bunch of different things, fantastic. Or if you decide that you've got a bunch of smaller cards that you want to sell and consolidate for the big card that you've always wanted, that's fine too. Not a right or a wrong way to do this, as I've said multiple times, and that is the beauty. And that's why this is fun. If we all thought, oh no, consolidation is the only way, then this wouldn't have been a fun question. And when people say, haven't we talked about this before? We have talked about this before. This is not the last time I'm ever going to talk about this topic. And it's possible that my opinion might go from one place to another and then back and everywhere in between. And that's part of the journey. And that, to me, is what makes this fun. This conversation, this brainstorming, this sharing different perspectives and opinions. That's what I love. This is not a channel where you're going to come and I'm going to show you the different variations of some particular card from the T205 set. That's just not what I like that stuff, but that's not my expertise. That's not my sweet spot. The thing I love most is these conceptual, theoretical, philosophical conversations about a hobby that we all share. And I think we all have an opinion on this topic, and I think that opinion is likely to change. And hearing the perspective of other people's opinions, to me, is an absolute hoot. So that's my take. Now, for this coming week's question, let me read you what we're going to talk about. Every third year, the Baseball Hall of Fame votes on classic era players pre-1980 for induction. Who is one player from the classic era that you feel most deserves to be inducted? So they've changed the Veterans Committee a few times. There's been different names. There's been different formats in which they do it. But a few years ago, not that many years ago, they switched it to every third year it rotates. There's a year where it's coaches, managers, contributors get voted in by the Veteran Committee. And then the following year, it's players who made their primary contributions to the game, players. The majority of their contributions to the game happened before 1980. That's the classic era. And then there's a different group that votes for the Veterans Committee the following year on the players who made their biggest contribution after 1980. And they have a panel who votes on veteran players. So this year, and it's happening soon, really soon, is they're looking at the classic era, the pre-1980s. So don't give a list of 5 guys you think are somewhat worthy of making the Hall of Fame and aren't in, who did their primary contributions before 1980. Give me one. You have to pick one person. And this is a player, not a coach, not an owner, not a manager. One player pre-1980. Who is it? More importantly, not who is it, but why? That's what I want to share this week, as the Hall of Fame is currently working on this process for people who might get inducted in this Hall of Fame cycle very, very soon. I want to know who you would put in.